Hello again. This video will introduce to you two other common instructional sequences, which are PPP, which stands for Presentation, Practice and Production, and Pre, In, Post stages. The second sequence is PPP, or Presentation, Practice and Production. It is often referred to as the traditional PPP method to mostly teach grammar. According to British Council, there are two main approaches to teach grammar, the inductive and the deductive approach. An inductive approach is when the rule is inferred from some form of guided discovery. In other words, the teacher gives the students a means to discover the rule for themselves. Meanwhile, a deductive approach is when the rule is presented and the language is produced based on the rule. To put it differently, the teacher gives the rule. And PPP is often known as deductive approach, which is more teacher-centered. Basically, you present the target language, give students plenty of controlled practice, and then the production stage is like a freer practice. In the presentation stage, building up stories on the board, using realia or flashcards, and miming are fun ways to present the language. Also, there are various activities that can be used for the second stage, practice. You may choose among gap-filling exercises, substitution drills, sentence transformations, split sentences, picture dictations, class questionnaire, or sentence reordering. It is important to note that those activities must be fairly controlled at this stage because the students have just got to know the new language. For the production stage, depending on the language you are teaching and on the level of your students, you can decide which freer activities to use. They can be information gap, role plays, interviews, simulations, find somebody who, spot the differences between two pictures, pictures clues, problem solving, personalization activities, or board games. Here, it is necessary to monitor and make a note of any mistakes for in-class feedback and analysis at the end of the lesson. Well, this approach appears rather teacher-centered, right? However, I'd like to emphasize that using PPP model does not need to exclude using a more inductive approach, since some form of learner-centered guided discovery could be built into the presentation stage. Let's look at an example of how to teach conditional sentence type 2 in a closer look to Unit 7, English 8. The teacher is using the PPP model. First, she asked her students what she's thinking about, and then introduces the target language. If I were you, I would see the doctor immediately. She practices and drills the sentence orally before writing it on the board, in positive, negative, and question form with short answers. She then focuses on form by asking students questions. For example, what do we use after if? And on meaning by asking the students questions to check that they have understood the concepts. For example, can I be you? No. What am I doing? Imagining. Second, when she is satisfied that her students understood the form and the meaning, she moves on to the practice stage of the lesson. She asks her students to complete 3 controlled practice exercises: matching if clauses and main clauses, giving correct tense of the verbs in the brackets, and rewriting sentences using conditional sentence type 2. During this stage of the lesson, it is very important to correct the phonological or grammatical mistakes too. Finally, the teacher encourages the students to use the second conditional more freely by involving them into the change game. Students will work in groups. Student A begins with the conditional sentence type 2. Student B uses the end of student A's sentence to begin his or her own sentence. Student C does the same. The students continue the game until the teacher tells them to stop. So far, we have talked a lot about how to teach grammar and vocabulary. So, how about teaching receptive skills like listening and reading? Let's first have a look at the following instructions in a listening class. The teacher informs the students that they are going to listen to something, then turns on the CD player, plays a listening track from the coursebook, lets the students do the task, plays the CD tracks again, and checks the answer. You may feel something was missing, I guess. On the surface, nothing was terribly wrong, and the instructions were clear, not much more to teaching listening than that, right? However, this approach lacks an understanding of the principles of teaching receptive skills, such as background knowledge, vocabulary, and techniques to deal with a specific listening skill. Therefore, this does little help to improve the student's listening ability. In this part, I will present the 3 stages of a good listening or reading lesson and provide some suggestions for each stage. The 3 stages are pre, in, post stages. In the pre-stage, you prepare your students to listen or read. Steve Brown suggests 2 types of tasks, bottom-up or top-down. The bottom-up approach focuses on important grammar and vocabulary that facilitates the understanding of the text. So, a bottom-up pre-listening or reading activity would involve pre-teaching some vocabulary or grammar. Meanwhile, the top-down approach encourages students to use their background knowledge to predict what they are going to read or listen. For example, you can ask your students to guess what a newspaper article might be about from the headline, the first sentence, or simply a picture. Or, if your listening track takes place in a hospital, you may ask who the speakers can be, what the topics of the conversation might be, and what they can see in the hospital. What's important here is to keep the pre-stage brief. Don't spend your 15 valuable minutes on a pre-listening activity, which is followed by a 1-minute listening text. The in stage is where your students listen or read and then do a task which develops certain language learning strategies, such as identifying main ideas, getting specific information, or making inference. To make the listening or reading easier, you should design several smaller tasks to make sure you go from an easier task to more challenging ones. And finally, the post stage is where you take your students beyond the text. Activities may vary from discussion on the topic of the text, discussion on the language encountered in the text, detection of difficulties during the in stage, and suggestion for improvement. If you are teaching a coursebook that involves listening or speaking activities, you may be able to identify these 3 stages. You may consider following the plan in the teacher's book or make some changes to it. For your reference, here is a sample pre-in-post reading lesson. While you're watching, try to identify the 3 different stages and pay very close attention to the way the teacher delivers it.
Don't read. Don't start reading yet. Look at the title. Gaetana, could you read the title for us? What does it say?
It's like that message.
It could be. If you want, you can. Very good. So what do you think it's going to talk about, according to that title?
You can train your body, but there are days.
Okay. Very good. Now, scan the first paragraph and tell me the name of the athlete. Rosalind? Steve Redgrave. Do you know this athlete? Look at the picture now, the photograph. What is this sport? What's the name of this sport? Okay, we're going to see him in action before we read about him. Okay, and you can turn off the light. What are your feelings after seeing this? Emotional? It's very emotional. You're going to find out why it's so emotional. Let's read until line 25. You're going to know why people say that he's a legend and what two sicknesses, illness he had to cope with. Okay? And very good. So diabetes is really hard for an athlete. Why? It's a very severe illness.
You are weak, right?
You're weak all the time? Tired? You feel weak?
You need medicine.
Insulin? What else? You're doing, yeah. But he were. Finish the reading from 25 to the end. Line 25 to the end. Okay, so who else put a lot of stress on their bodies? And what happened with them? Okay, one at a time. Gaetana? Can you say that again? Okay. No, they don't work about their muscles. Okay. Katie, you were going to say something. The same? Okay. Very.
Sixth year.
Ready? So who can explain it again? Rosalind, can you explain it again, the game? The activity? Can you say it again? Can you explain it? To the right.
But tell me about the experience.
Who wants to share one experience? For example, about a day you were resilient. Jesus will explain it.
I just
Okay, now I want to know if you
Understand? Jesus.
okay. Well, she told me about talking about when she's sick, when she's sick and bad, and then that don't care to care, so she tries to be strong and go beyond that.
Okay. What about determination? Okay. I heard you and you were saying
Yeah.
very good.
Yeah,
Experience.
when I went to live in Italy, it was very hard for me because the mentality of the people out there was very different from France. So it was very, very hard for me. But I showed determination because I tried to understand their culture, the way to think, you know. So for several years, it was hard for me. But I tried to be strong. I tried to face those moments, and so I think that it's a way on how I showed my determination.
Why do you think that we did this activity?
Why?
to practice and use those.
To learn the new vocabulary, to use the new words. Very good. And we did it? To memorize it? Uh-huh. To use it? Yeah? Alex?
About the words, the clear definition.
Very clear definition. Yes. Very good. Now, for tomorrow,
In summary, in this video, I have presented to you two commonly found instructional models for lesson sequencing. Hope it helps when it comes to teaching grammar, listening, or reading. Bye!